recording is an online roundtable discussion with guest speakers and an introduction by Executive Director of the Blue Water Wood Alliance, Mike Baker. For timestamps on when each speaker begins, please refer to the description below in the video. For more information on the Blue Water Wood Alliance's programs, events, news, and information related to COVID-19, please visit www.bluewaterwoodalliance.com.
Alliance. I wanted to welcome everybody who's here that are not members of the BWA again, particularly folks from AMAC and from CKCA and other organizations in the wood industry participating with us today. We're continuing to keep our events open at this time during the pandemic. I had a meeting with some board members last week, and they unanimously decided that we need to continue to do this as long as it makes sense for us. We believe that we're fortunate and blessed enough to have the capacity and the capabilities to engage everybody in this virtual manner, and we have a good reach with the industry across, well, Southwestern Ontario and Ontario, but also now with Canada, working with Woodworking Canada magazine, and also with Harry Urban in Chicago, promoting our events. Also, I'm working with BC Wood and QWeb in Quebec, and I've asked them to extend it to their members. And I know we had a company from Quebec join us last week. And I know we've got interested members joining us from Alberta and across Canada now. So this is all good. And we're continuing to provide good information and some value. You're going to notice that we're going to have some polls coming up. So I notice, Ryan, there's some people in the waiting room. You can let those folks in. So I'd like to welcome everybody. We also have a number of government partners that work with us that are on the call today. I'd like to shout out to MNRF, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and Natural Resources Canada, who are here today. I see Richard Lipman's here from the Wood Manufacturing Council. Welcome, Richard. So we've got a good cross-section of folks. So one of the things, the direction we're going here with our events is that we started out at the very beginning trying to provide some answers to people, because at the very beginning of this pandemic, everybody was wondering what the heck's going on, what's going on with these programs, how do they manage working with their employees, managing health and safety, minimizing hazards, complying with employment law, and what programs are available for the companies, what programs are available for the employees. So there's a lot of questions that we work to answer from the very beginning, and also introducing some subject matter expertise when it comes to health and safety, with sales development, with leadership. And so today, it's brought us to the biggest questions where people were interested in getting more information about was, where are we going with our recovery? And in terms of an economic insight into the path, the trajectory of not only the pandemic, but also how we're reacting as an economy to the pandemic, and then how do we as wood manufacturing companies and our suppliers and partners prepare to react, and what can we expect? So and the other big piece to this is that there are 40% of our members that aren't exporting that could. And this is an export readiness event as well, to help wake people up, get an understanding of where the opportunities can be. And we're going to be having some more export readiness events coming up through the summer. So to that effect, we've invited Stephen Tapp. He's the Deputy Chief Economist from Export Development Canada. We're going to have him talk a little bit later. First of all, we're going to deal with leadership in times of challenging times, particularly the COVID time. We had Reid speak to us a couple of weeks ago, and in all of the polls, leadership kept popping up. So we brought Barry back to talk for 15 minutes to recap some of the key things that can be some takeaways for you. And from that, because of the interest that's been bubbling up from all of the companies reaching out to us, we decided to offer a lean training series working with Barry. So we're going to give a little bit of a blurb about that at the end of Barry's presentation, and do a little poll as to who's interested, because we have that mapped out in the coming weeks. After we do that poll, we're going to do another poll quickly on future topics. We have a bunch in mind, but we want to get a last snapshot from your needs. And then we'll introduce Stephen Tapp, the Deputy Chief Economist for Export Development Canada. He's got a very extensive presentation to provide with you today. And it's basically our economic outlook and implications for us as an industry. Our next event is June the 17th. So please mark your calendars. That'll be 3 weeks out. And then we're going to aim to finish about 1:15, and then there's time for folks. Typically what happens when we have an event, our face-to-face networking events, a lot of folks elect to continue to hang around and chat and network. Other folks, we go to a pub or a bar or a restaurant, and we stay a couple more hours. And that's where a lot of business-to-business takes place. That's where a lot of relationships get solidified. And so we're going to try to create that environment. We're calling it the Overtime Club at 1:15. So that's our introduction. So welcome everybody. So what I'd like to do now is I will stop sharing my screen, and I'll pass it over to Barry Reid with LMI. Or Ryan, did you? Welcome, Barry.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be back. I know you asked me to do a kind of a recap of the last time I was on. And so what I've got in store for you is I'm going to do a quick recap for those that were there last time. I'll keep the recap short. I'm going to share some new information as well. I'll keep it short, but I think, Mike, I might go 20 minutes instead of 15. Hopefully that's okay. Let me share my screen. Okay. So everybody see that right now? And everybody can hear me? Good. Okay, so we're talking about leadership and challenge through crisis. And what I wanted to sort of recap with you is where I started the last time. You know, the qualities and habits and behaviors of great leaders are actually consistent. So you don't have to rewrite the book during times of challenge or crisis. So what do I mean by that? Is that if you're a good leader, if you've been sharpening a saw, if you already know what to do in times of regular times of challenge and crisis, this is no different, right? This is just another challenge, another crisis, and really you just have to, use what you know. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we do know as far as leadership techniques and traits. One of the things that we have to be aware of is that before you can lead and manage others, you must learn to lead and manage yourself. And what do I mean by that? Well, as leaders, we do set the example, right? People follow people that have it together. So we need to lead by example. We need to lead by having the right attitudes and behaviors. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to repeat what we did in the last session to just remind you about the 3 common traits of successful people. Because I'm sure you'll agree that if you adopt the habits and traits of unsuccessful people, you're more likely to be unsuccessful. But if you adopt the habits and behaviors of successful people, you're more likely to be successful. And it's been well researched. So we know that successful people are focused and they're goal setters. In fact, the top 3% of successful people on the planet, we know that they all have written specific goals and a plan to achieve those goals. And we also know that successful people are self-motivated, which means they know it doesn't just happen, that you have to learn how to take control and motivate yourself. And the last trait of successful people is that they have this positive can-do, I've got this attitude, okay? So, learning how to adopt these traits will actually set you in good stead to be more successful. Now, if you're going to be successful, I guess you should really define success. This I didn't present last time, but I think the definition success is really, really important. And this is a definition that Paul J. Meyer, the founder of LMI, came up with many years ago, and it stands the test of time. And success is a progressive realization of worthwhile predetermined personal goals. And so that's a mouthful. So I'm going to break it down word by word. And the first word is probably one of the most critical concepts to wrap your head around in success. What we mean by progressive is success is a journey. It's not a destination. And there's a lot of people on this planet that think success is a destination. And this is a problem, right? They're thinking, geez, as soon as I get that big job, I'm successful. As soon as I buy that big house, I'm successful. As soon as I get that thing or get there, I'm successful. And what happens is they get there and they're sorely disappointed. They go, wow, is that all there is to success? So understand that success is more of a way of life. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of living. Success is a journey. Realization, as I said, since it's a journey, what we would suggest is if you set goals and you've started to achieve the goals, well, then you're already on the way to success because you're actually getting traction. You've decided what you want and you're starting to realize some of your goals. Goals have to be worthwhile. They have to be worthwhile to you. They have to be worthwhile to society. And the goals need to be predetermined. So what does that mean? It means that you can't marry into success. You can't inherit it. You have to determine exactly what you want, and then you have to set out to achieve it. And the goals have to be personal. So that means that you have to own them. Right? You can't be a lawyer because mom wants to be a lawyer. You have to want to be a lawyer if you're going to be a lawyer, right? This personal issue is kind of a challenge when we're leading people in organizations, right? Because and it's a challenge, but it's a challenge that can be overcome. When you think about it, the people that are sort of on the front lines, they may not have chosen the goals that you're choosing for them in the business, right? They may not really care to be, more efficient or better customer service or whatever it is you're trying to get them to do. But this is why it's critically important to understand that success comes with this, that people have to have ownership and own the goals. So as leaders, we need to work on this. We need to work on empowerment and engagement and getting people to actually take ownership of what they're working on. And to actually, so they're not just motivated because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble if they don't do it, or even if they're going to get a bonus or whatever. It's because, yeah, they've bought in. They said, yeah, this is not the company's goal. It's my goal too. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do, and I'm all in. If you can get to that point, you're going to have a successful, employee and a successful business. And the final word in this definition says goals. So progressive realization of worthwhile predetermined personal goals, and the goals have to be SMART goals. I'm sure you've heard that, an acronym: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and tangible goals. So success is a progressive realization of worthwhile predetermined personal goals. And I hope you think that's a great definition of success. And that's the one that we use as we work with our leaders. A reminder, success is a journey, not a destination. I reviewed this last time, but this is important. And we're going to quickly go through the formula for success, because what can be more important than the formula for success? And it's actually a fairly simple formula. You get success from delivering results, okay? It's as simple as that. If you deliver results, you're going to be successful. If you don't deliver results, you're not going to be successful. And you deliver results from, frankly, what you do, right? If you have the right behaviors, you'll get the right results, you'll be successful. If you have the wrong behaviors, you get the wrong results, and you're not going to be successful. I think everybody is muted, but I'm just wondering, and if anybody was paying attention last time, what has an effect on your behavior? Anybody? Press the space bar. Given what do you think has an effect on your behavior?
The way you think.
The way you think. Yeah, Lauren, the way you think. Other people can sort of say the way you think is your attitude, right? Your attitude determines your behavior, okay? If you have the wrong attitude, you're going to have the wrong behaviors. If you have the right attitude, you're going to have the right behaviors. And what has had an effect on your attitude then? What can have an effect on your attitude?
External influences like the economy or loss of your job or family stresses.
Yeah, that can affect your attitude presently, right? It can affect your attitude, and your attitude that you have today actually has been informed by all those inputs throughout a lifetime, not just in the last week or the last day. So everything you've experienced since the day you were born, how you're treated by mom and dad and sisters and brothers, and I'm good at this, I tried that, I'm not good at that. All those inputs, all that conditioning, we'll call it, has given you the attitude that you have today. And so the formula remains the same. This thing here is key, isn't it? Attitude. Of all these things that you have that you don't have control over, the one thing that you do have control over is this thing called attitude, right? Because it's in your own brain. It might not be easy, but it is a one thing that you can take control of. And since this is how it was formed in the first place, is through conditioning, the only way to change that attitude and come up with a different attitude is through new conditioning, reconditioning your brain, new inputs. And so, you know, once you learn how the proper inputs, and some of the inputs we talked about last time were hanging around with the right people. You know, I would say you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with. Reading the right information, taking good training courses. 2 key ways that we recondition our attitude is taking a page from the most successful athletes on the planet and some of the most successful people on the planet. And that is visualization. If you're familiar with the word visualization, it's actually painting a picture of the outcome and how things will be once you achieve your goal. And affirmation, which is simply personal self-talk, the ability to talk yourself through the situation and say, I've got this. I've handled tougher situations than this before. I make decisions for the right reasons. All those things are ways to condition your attitude and take control of this. Because once you can take control of your attitude, then you've got your the right behaviors, you're going to get results and you're going to be more successful. So again, it all comes through inputs. And that's, frankly, the formula for success. And we sort of want to re-emphasize, if this is the formula, then that's the key. And the attitude is nothing more than a habit of thought. And learning how to take control of that habit of thought is key for successful people. So you receive your results from what you do, okay? This is a really kind of a critical concept. If you've got so let's get this right. So let's say you've got control of your attitude and you've figured out the right behaviors. Well, now you have to spend the time on the right behaviors. But there's this thing called the Pareto principle, and it pops up all over the place. The 80-20 rule. Probably 20% of your customers give you 80% of your revenue. Probably 20% of your customers give you 80% of your problems, okay? You know what? 20% of what we do gets us 80% of our results. And the scary flip side of that means that 80% of the time we're spinning our wheels doing things that are only giving us 20% of our results. And if time's our most valuable asset, right, and what we do gets us our results and success, then time is our life. So we need to learn how to take control of our time. And so why does this 80-20 thing happen? I'm going to walk you through what we'll call the time matrix, okay? And the time matrix is, we'll call it the tyranny of the imperative. At any given time, you are in one of these quadrants, which is a combination of urgency and importance, okay? Quadrant 1 are these things that are urgent and important. This is where we spend a lot of time, unfortunately, because we have to, right? It has to be done immediately. This is high priority stuff. You cannot delay this. It's imperative, okay? Quadrant 2 is important, as important as quadrant 1. The challenge with quadrant 2 is it's not necessarily urgent. This stuff has to be done. It comes and searches you out, right? Things fall off the rails, things fall through the cracks, customers are upset, machinery is breaking down. You just have to deal with it. This stuff is important, but it's not urgent. So you don't have to do it today. You can maybe put it off to tomorrow, which gets put off until the next week, which gets put off till next month. And some of the important but not urgent things that we talk about are things like goal setting. We just talked about that the most successful people on the planet set clear goals and a plan to achieve those goals. They also track and keep score, because what gets measured can be managed, and you can't really manage anything if you're not tracking it. Things like planning and scheduling, things like training and communicating, things like organizing. So all these things are not urgent, hey, I got to do this before 10 o'clock, right? And this is where your high payoff activities lie. Your high payoff activities are those activities that 20% of the things that you do that get you 80% of your results lie in this quadrant. And you have to be aware, I've just used these sort of 4 examples here of high payoff activities in quadrant 2. It's learning what yours are on top of these. These really apply to almost any leader, these 4. But let's take a look at other careers. So salespeople, a high payoff activity may be the time they're spending face-to-face in front of a customer making a sales call. That's a high payoff activity, not pushing paper back to the office. What about an operations manager, right? Maybe it is some a more in-depth training or trying to figure out how to be more effective or more efficient on the line. Whatever it is, you need to figure out what your high payoff activities are and spend some time in quadrant 2. Quadrant 3 is really an insidious quadrant because it's got this sense of urgency, okay? This sense of urgency, but it's actually not important. So things like meeting others' priorities, low priority work. People running into your office with emergencies that aren't emergencies, busy work procrastination, you're just kind of fiddling around because you don't want to handle the tough stuff. Things that are unrelated to your goals. This is the key, one of the key reasons to set goals. If you're very clear on the 3 or 4 most important goals for your business or even your personal life, and you're working away and you realize, well, man, what I'm doing now and what I've been doing all morning is not getting me anywhere closer to my goals, then you're probably in quadrant 3. You should stop what you're doing and start working on something that'll get you closer to your goals. Quadrant 3 is also things that could and should be done by others, okay? So we tend to do this, don't we? We do things that are easy. We do things that are worth less than our time, things that should be delegated. So, when you find yourself in quadrant 3, thinking about ways to delegate, simplify this process, perhaps eliminate it completely is key. Quadrant 4, yes?
5 minutes.
Okay, we'll be just in time. So little, no value, okay? In quadrant 4, this is not urgent, not important, non-productive, waste of time, waste of other people's time. In the quadrant, this is where you're being irresponsible. Don't get me wrong, everybody needs their downtime, to watch your favorite show or whatever, but this is, you're here when you should be doing something else and you're wasting time. Reactive quadrant, right? This will come and find you. Don't have to worry about this. You're just reacting in this quadrant. This quadrant will not come and find you. This is a proactive quadrant. You need to block time to spend time in quadrant 2 or it will never happen. And you have to believe and trust that every hour you spend in quadrant 2 may save you 5 to 10 hours in quadrant 1 and quadrant 3. This is a quadrant of deception. I'm sure you've had those days where you ever had those days where you go, man, what a busy day. Didn't get a darn thing done. That's because you were deceiving yourself with all this busy work, low priority stuff. And this is a quadrant of irresponsibility. So in order to take control of your time and be more successful, stay out of here. Stay out of there. Say yes to quadrant 2 and say no to quadrant 3. And take control of your time and take control of your life. So a closing thought is to choose time is to save time. You always have enough time if you use it wisely. Your dilemma goes deeper than having a shortage of time. It's basically a problem of priorities. Most people leave undone those things that should be done, while they do things they shouldn't be doing. Set priorities for your goals. A major part of successful living lies in your ability to put first things first. Most major goals are not achieved because people put second things first. Is that what you're doing getting you closer to your objectives? Anything that is wasted effort represents wasted time. So don't serve time, make time serve you. So that wraps it up for me. A quick presentation there, Mike. I don't know if anybody has any questions, comments, challenges on the content.
Thank you very much, Barry. Just in the interest of time, I'd like to invite folks to post any comments in the chat. And I'm going to flip it to Ryan quickly. We've been working with Barry for a couple of years now. And when things, the COVID event happened, we were wondering how could we execute some training for folks who have asked for it virtually. So Ryan, could you just give a 30-second rundown of what we got mapped out for the training that's coming up? And they're going to have a quick poll if anybody wants to get more information.
Great, thanks, Mike. And thank you, Barry, for that presentation today. A lot of really excellent information. So everybody here who's listening now, we have a training program that we're going to be sending out a communication after this event, and it's going to outline a 12-week module. It's going to be happening bi-weekly, and we're going to be doing this with the LMI. So Barry is going to be our key trainer for this. And I'm going to share with my screen here with you right now something very important you're going to want to consider. This training series that we're going to be doing on leadership and taking control of your time and your goals is going to be happening in probably, I would say, about 4 weeks' time. And with that, this training that we're going to be having, I'm going to share my screen now. I think you can see this here. There's a huge opportunity to get cost savings with the Canada Ontario Jobs Grant. So many of you are familiar with this program. It's upwards of 83% in savings that you can have for your training, for your company. So it's free money. It's money on the table. And it's a government program there to help out your staff, elevate their skill levels. And yourself as well, whoever you want to be bringing into this program. We're going to have the 12-week outline of the steps, looking at all of what we're going to be covering as well in the communication to follow. And here you can see what the big difference you can get when you take the time to apply for this high payoff activity and capture the savings that you can get from the COJG. So a 12-week program like this would really be boiled down to about, as you can see here, about $63 for a session. So really, really excellent cost savings that can be had there, and the value that it returns to you for your business and what it can return to you for your time and the savings you can get so you can reinvest in your business is absolutely huge. So that is something, because this program is going to be happening in about 4 weeks' time, we would really highly recommend people who are going to be considering this to at least put in your application or put the question out there. If you need assistance with it, Barry can help. If you want to contact the BWA, we can put you in touch with people who can help with this to streamline the process. It's only, I think, a page or two on a government application. Very high payoff activity to be thinking about, information to follow. And we're going to have a poll here as well. So if you have any questions, you're not sure about the fit, or if this is for you and you're not sure about information details, you want to know something more, Barry is here to help you. We're here to help you. And we're just going to put this out there. That way, for people who are interested, we can put you guys together in touch to extend that conversation to find out how this could fit for your company and just to have answer any questions that you guys may have lingering. Okay. And it's our first opportunity that we've had to launch this leadership program. So we're really excited to bring this together for the membership. We've had a lot of questions on this. So keep an eye out for that email and make sure you get your applications into the COJG as soon as you can. And then if you want to get in touch with Barry, we're going to put a poll forward, like as Mike had mentioned, that we can just connect you guys to answer any questions if you have concerns, or if you're wondering about the program, you're wondering about the fit, or you want more information, we can help you out with that. Okay.
Yeah, and that's probably the best way. If anybody wants an exploratory conversation, just to ask questions, that's what I'm here for, and love to chat with you.
So you have the poll, Ryan? Can you post that so people can respond? Okay. There you go.
So it's come live now. And thank you, Mike, for pointing that out. The chat here is available. So if you have any questions or you want to be commenting on the video, just hover your mouse over the bar. You'll see it pop up, and then you can keep that on a side window to comment on that. Okay.
Well, the moment we've been waiting for, some economic outlook for our industry. And Stephen Tapp, thank you very much for joining us today. He's the Deputy Chief Economist for Export Development Canada. And I know you're a busy fellow, and we thank you for taking some time. And I've got the trigger on the slide, so I'm going to hand it over to you verbally now, Stephen, and then I'll advance the slides as you like.
Okay. Very happy if people want to insert chat messages or jump in as we go. I'm more than happy to take questions as we do it. So yeah, you mentioned elevated levels of stress and times that are difficult for business leaders, and economists are similarly in that boat. We've been in perpetual forecast mode at EDC since middle of March as this stuff started to get much more serious. This has been a pretty major adjustment for everybody in terms of working in different ways. So Mike, I mean, usually what we would do in this kind of environment, I'd hop on a plane and fly to Toronto, wherever you guys are, take maybe 3 hours to get through security, go, maybe spend a night in a hotel, maybe take a cab and then come and see you. And instead we're finding out that there are maybe not exactly as effective ways, because we're not in person, but can still share similar levels of information in terms of, content and quality and feedback. The online polls you got going are great. So I think some of this is going to force people to learn some new skills, and some things are going to actually be better for all this stuff right now. But we are still in the thick of it, and a big adjustment for people. So maybe you go to the first slide. But what I plan to do is just go through, as an economist, like I said, I've been doing this for 20 years. And I would say the global financial crisis in 2008-9 was a very busy time, very tumultuous, lots of stuff going on. But this is, I think, orders of magnitude different in terms of the scope of people that are involved and dragged into this, and the level of complexity from a health perspective and just from an overall economic perspective. So the chart here is just going to try to go through some of the things that I'm seeing from my perch in Ottawa and working on the global economy, trying to brief our senior management and business executives to figure out, as you said, kind of what's going on and what's coming next. So we'll do our best to provide some advice that's useful for you. The left-hand part of this is a map, which is just wanted to kind of level set to show we are now globally at over 5 million cases of COVID that have been confirmed. And essentially there have been several phases of this virus. So we started in Wuhan in China in January, essentially. They started some lockdowns there at the end of January. There were cruise ships and manufacturing linkages and others that brought it over to Italy and spread throughout Europe. The United States has seen the biggest increase in terms of the number of cases right now. This is the most cases that are active and confirmed. And more recently, in the last couple of weeks, I've noticed there's been a very big uptick in places like Russia and in Brazil and in India. So there are some concerns of potential new hotspots. And if you look at the chart on the right there, this is the number of global confirmed cases. So you see things really kind of shot up and getting out of control really through March, and stabilizing in terms of the new level of cases throughout April. But now over the last week or so, we are seeing a bit of an uptick globally in terms of the number of confirmed cases. So that's looking like there's containment measures are starting to ease. And in some places, there are worries about second waves of activity. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I'm just going to, again, go through some charts. Like I said, as an economist, we don't normally have charts that are as exciting. Things don't typically move around by 30% in a month for most of the stuff that we do. But we've been adjusting the axes and updating and finding new data to track in real time. This is just looking at equity markets, but it's been pretty clear as it started to unravel through February. We had in emerging markets in Asia and Europe, North America, all the major stock market indexes fell by upwards of 30% or so through to more or less the end of March. And we have seen a recovery as central banks lowered interest rates and started pumping some money into asset purchase programs. The stock market has recovered, not back to where it was, but it's certainly stabilized. And some of the corporate bond spreads that had widened pretty significantly for, let's say, Newfoundland provincial government was having difficulty getting any buyers for theirs. Non-investment grade businesses seeing borrowing costs increase significantly in things like airlines and oil and gas, those kind of things. So bond spreads widened out, but central banks have been doing a lot of work, and I think at least on the financial market side, unlike the shock we had back in the financial crisis, the system is still working and hasn't seized up, but that's really being very much aided by monetary policy actions. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've seen has been a massive decline in oil prices, and just show on the chart there that we started, there's different measures of oil prices here, looking at Canadian price on the bottom, Brent price in Europe, or West Texas Intermediate in the States, but they're all kind of doing the same trend, going down since COVID started. And on top of this, from March until April, we had basically a price war where Saudi Arabia saw an opportunity, had a disagreement with Russia, started flooding the market in Europe there and discounting their prices, which at the time when demand has gone down, you're increasing supply, prices just took a bigger hit there. And it took about a month to kind of sort out with some reductions in supply, which are still not sufficient to offset how much demand's fallen. And one of the I would say interesting things anyways is I had discussions back with our energy expert who's grew up in Alberta. His dad was an SVP at one of the big companies. And I said, do you think we're gonna get negative oil prices? And we were sort of thinking, like, is this possible? Is this a reality that you could imagine? Because before 10, 15 years ago, we never thought we'd get negative interest rates. And then now we had, at least shortly there in April 20th, Canadian prices went negative for a little bit in that day. And there were futures contracts that were being settled and a bunch of oil coming out of pipelines and storage capacity being reached. So we saw negative prices, which is historically crazy for this market. But luckily, we're a month out of that, and prices have come back significantly, back into positive territory and at least stabilized. And we avoided the settlements issue this month that we had last month, where nobody wanted to hold these contracts. So there's been a pretty big decline in oil prices that we see as being persistent. If you go to the next slide, I can explain part of why that is. So some of this is just a lot less international travel and a lot less travel for work. So my car has not moved very much in the last 11 or 12 weeks, and very few people getting on flights. Here we're tracking commercial flights across the world, and we've seen a decline of about 75% over the middle of March as all these lockdowns came in place. Business travel stopped pretty much immediately. Personal travel, people were going through March break, and some got out and some didn't get out, but a lot of this has switched over now to just moving cargo, and very little demand and also restrictions on people moving across borders. But you can see at the very tail end of that chart, if you look closely, it's getting a little bit better, but it's getting a little bit better from a very, very low level. And so we are seeing, very, very little air travel. Next slide, please. So just talk a bit about the environment that we had coming into COVID, and we're looking at global trade and trying to figure out, how the economy was doing and where we're going. These bars here show the growth rate on a year-over-year basis of global trade. And what's interesting here is just to note that back in 2019, there was a big flare-up of throughout kind of different phases, but U.S. and China were fighting about tariffs, and that had increased uncertainty, and global trade was slowing even before we got this shock of COVID. So you can see that the bars are getting worse in the first quarter of this year. So January, February, March was especially bad. We know that April data will eventually be bad as well on the farther right of that chart when it comes in. So we're down about 4% now, and we know that it's going to get worse. The forecast from the World Trade Organization looks basically not a best case scenario, but their kind of base case would be a drop of about 13% in global trade. And they do also look at a scenario which is a little bit worse if this drags on and gets worse than most people expect. You could see global trade drop by about a third. That's not out of the question based on what's happening right now. So global trade was shrinking before COVID. If you go to the next slide, I'll just show you what's happening with Canadian trade. It shouldn't be too surprising, I guess, in that context, as we had slower growth, U.S.-China trade wars and those kind of things, that Canada's merchandise trade has been trending down similarly throughout the last half, or at least the last 3 quarters of 2019. We've been in slowdown mode. And in particular, the chart on the right is services trade. So we've had these border closures and a lot less tourists, a lot less air transportation, and you see those falling off of a cliff there. That's just in March data. So we're just now starting to see these bigger moves in Canadian trade data, and we're going to get April's data next Thursday, and we would probably anticipate another 10% drop in most of these series. So Canada's been struggling given the export and trade reliance we have in our economy, but not really too much worse than anybody else. Next slide here. And we do a survey at EDC looking at our customers to figure out what's happening with supply chains in the global economy. And these really are moving around and being adjusted in real time. So we asked customers here, are you thinking of, or have you made changes to the suppliers you have? Domestic side, 6% said yes. International side, 9% said yes. And the number that are considering changes is about double that for both. And the reasons that they're telling us, why are you making changes to your supply chain? Well, some of them are pretty obvious. One is my supplier is bankrupt. So I can no longer get the part that I need that's crucial to make my input because the supplier no longer exists, or they're in bankruptcy protection or other issues, or we just want to build in some redundancy to the system in case somebody who we're worried about goes under. So supplier shutdowns is a big concern. If you're working across borders, given the border closures to non-essential and non-business related travel, there's a lot of uncertainty about delivery dates that people are telling us, and a lot of delays in production processes. So we are seeing some changes in supply chains and behavior that we think is going to be pretty persistent in terms of less reliance upon one customer, one supplier in one market, and trying to build in redundancies into systems. Next slide, please, Mike. And looking at kind of how far do we think that spending can fall? One way we thought of looking at this was to figure out, for an average consumer, overall consumer spending last year before COVID, try to group these into different categories. So the first one on the left there is essentially non-discretionary or staples, the stuff that people have to spend money on regardless of their financial situation, more or less. It's the kind of Maslow hierarchies of needs here. Food, shelter, keeping the lights on, utilities, ICT, communication, things like that. Demand has gone up for that. And in my insurance, finance and insurance industry, we've seen a big increase in demand for those types of things. So these are things that the 60% of the economy say, where it's pretty insulated in the sense that it's not doing well, but people are still spending. We've seen, food retailers, grocery retailers stocking up. They're getting through all right. But if you move further to the right of that chart, you'll see that there's different types of categories. So in the areas that would most affect the folks that you guys do business with, what I would call delayables for some of these things are things that you don't need to buy now, but you might be able to put off if you're feeling financial strain. New cars, so seeing a substitution more towards used cars if people need to use cars. People aren't buying clothes right now because they can't go to stores and they're not going out very much, but appliances and furniture. So I think one of the things that we're going to see, which probably relevant to the industry you guys are looking at, would be a move towards renovations. So the housing market is being hit pretty hard right now in terms of resales. But I know a lot of people that are kind of at the other end of things, where they may be professional families that have been working online in office environments, and they're stuck at home now with multiple kids and no clarity on what's happening going forward with daycare and things. And I'm actually seeing in some areas renovations where people want to build a new office so that they can get through this, or kind of just retrofit their house. So I do think there's going to be some substitution away from new builds to kind of retrofitting things, making things work. Work-related spending is about 5% of spending. And then on the farthest right, we see about 20% of the economy. It's not gone to zero, but it's fallen considerably and has been hit, some of these things in the ranges I showed, of 70-80%. So restaurants, there's still some takeout options online for many places, but the levels of sales have fallen considerably. Recreation and culture, so the NHL has announced that there may be a season, or at least playoffs, starting back up at some point in time. We'll see. But large gatherings have been shut down, and we were already talking about some of the things like that this summer. Any kind of personal services, so that would include dentistry, haircuts, chiropractors, all that stuff, and personal travel. Most people have, if they haven't outright canceled their summer plans, they've certainly adjusted them, and it's much more closer to home, staycation, camping kind of stuff, and very little demand for hotels. So that, if you go down to the next slide, that just kind of gives you a sense of how we're thinking about the different types of spending, so you can think about where are the customers going to be. Looking at credit card spending data, which is done on a weekly basis. So normally we have monthly data that comes in a couple months after it happens. And now we've seen people getting a bit more creative. So RBC has been looking at their credit card spending data from their users and customers. And they've seen a drop of about a third from mid-March down to the bottom there. And again, we are seeing this little bit of an uptick, but it's still way below. Spending levels are way below what they normally would be. We're not out of the woods yet. But I think we may be reaching that part where we've hit kind of the trough of as containment measures come off and some sense of normalcy comes back, there'll be a bit of timid, but there'll be some more spending. But that kind of just gives you a ballpark that overall economic activity has probably fallen, I would say, by 25 to 30% or so over that period as we lock down. Next slide. So this is a bit of a busy chart, but just to show you a heat map of by sectors, where are the sectors that have been hit hardest by this. And this is looking at the number of hours worked in these different sectors. So in red, you've seen a 64% drop in the number of hours worked in April relative to pre-COVID for places like restaurants and hotels. So this accommodation and food is getting hit. Personal services, I mentioned before, culture and recreation. So that's where the biggest shocks have been. Also in retail trade, which is, you know, shopping malls, bricks and mortar, those kind of things. And if you look over on the forestry, which is lumped in here with mining, oil and gas, it's down, but it's down less than the overall economy is taking a hit right now. So just put this in perspective on the next slide, which will show you, like I mentioned, we've been kind of updating our graphs as we go, and just a bit of it's a horror show to see. I mean, we're locking down the economy for good reason, but the impact is pretty significant. So in the recession, we had a decline of, let's say, not even 5% in terms of the number of hours worked in 2009 relative to before. And in 2020, we're down almost 30%. Again, so this is just kind of more evidence in terms of spending and hours worked. We think the economy's been hit by something about a quarter, about a third from the drop when the lockdowns came in to kind of where we're at right now. Next slide. And so thinking about the sectors and kind of business to business or consumers that you may be working with, just as a sort of highlight of where the areas are that the demand will be weak and there's not going to be much activity. I mentioned accommodation, food services, so any kind of cabinetry and work on restaurants or those types of places, I wouldn't see a lot of demand there right now. They're going to be pretty, they didn't have a lot of financial buffers coming in. Sales are down quite a lot. Also mentioned these other ones I mentioned before in the retail sector. Oil and gas has been hit both with the COVID shock, so people aren't driving their cars very much at all right now. People aren't getting in planes and flying. There was a price war that broke out, so we have far too much oil right now, and we see those prices as being weak for quite a while. The transportation side is airlines, as I showed, but also aerospace, so the manufacturing of planes, manufacturing of cars. People will be putting off a lot of those durable purchases. So the manufacturing sector will be worse than others. Go to the next slide, and I can actually talk about where there might be some that are doing better than others. These sectors have either are well positioned to weather the storm, or there's certain aspects of the work that they do. So I mentioned finance and insurance as an industry now is just we're being pummeled with requests for insurance products or other financing and borrowing, given what's this unprecedented COVID stuff. People that are involved in the healthcare sector have been very, very busy, obviously. So outside of the only area that you're not seeing a lot of activity in health is elective surgeries and things in the US, where the coverage is different, obviously. But people that are in public sector unionized jobs, including education, has shifted online, and people are still being paid for the most part. So they have been insulated from this. For information and professional services, so the kind of work I assume that Barry does is this type of stuff where people are providing now they can shift online relatively easily to provide consulting and professional services and still keep going, meeting customers and food retailing, because people have been stocking up like crazy, so filling their cupboards. Utilities I mentioned, and mining doing a bit better than oil and gas. So that's just a little snapshot of some of the sector view. Let me go down to, and then, so Mike, you said on this slide here, you provided some of the data for me on the next slide, which you guys got from a report I think you did with the Conference Board of Canada, but you said you wanted to pipe in because you might have some insights here that you can provide for your members.
Well, I just wanted to let everybody know that this is the information that I use to present to our government partners to quantify who we are as an industry, and as the value added wood processing or secondary industry in the forest industry, because we are an extension of the forest industry. To have really good data on the secondary industry, it doesn't really exist out there. We had to do a lot of digging. So 4 years ago,
it's tricky.
Yeah, and 4 years ago, well, actually, it was after, so it was more like 3 years ago. We worked with Richard Lippman with the Wood Manufacturing Council, and then we compared some of their data with the Conference Board of Canada, and we came up with these numbers here. I also want to do a shout out to Stephen Kleiser with Kleiser Media, because I know you guys have a pulse on the number of companies are there. So I know that our number of companies is low. And these are the numbers that we had from 3 years ago. So perhaps, or 4 years ago. So perhaps we could touch base after this. But just as an industry across Canada, there was 5,300 companies, 88,000 jobs, 350 million I'm sorry, 3.5 billion. Sorry, that's 30. Sorry. Yeah, 3.5 billion.
That's the 3.5 billion for that payroll. Yeah.
Right, payroll and revenue 17. So when you chunk it down to our little section in southwestern Ontario, I believe there's more than 1,400 companies. In fact, I'm positive there are. But these are the numbers we're using, and 22,500 jobs, 900 million in payroll, and revenue of 5.2 billion. So, but in our Blue Water Wood Alliance, we have 130 companies. We represent 5,000 jobs, about 200 million in payroll, and about 600 million in revenues. That's just our paid membership. So these are numbers that I believe are much higher in reality. And I wanted to just mention that. And forestry logging employs about 27,000. So as you can see that in Canada, the value-added wood processing industry is a very much of a going concern in adding a lot to the economy. So I want to work with Richard and Stephen and in the Conference Board and update our numbers. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and if you go to the next slide here, this was what I was asking my research assistant. I said, well, what can we pull up kind of similar? And he's got, I don't know how well this applies to your sector here, but he's got some wood paneling, millwork, cabinetry, vanity. So he's got some numbers. These are Canadian-wide numbers, so this is going to be an aggregate number. But this is
right.
kind of for your reference. If these are useful, feel free to use them or email me, and we'll try to get to the bottom of some of these. Because I know I'm working with a lot of industry associations. They always have the same kind of concern that when you look at StatsCan official data on a website, it doesn't necessarily pick up the activities that are being done at a more granular level that people want to know. You know, what's my CMA doing, or what's happening in the region or my industry. So if we go to the outlook, I can turn. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So you had 18 billion, and so we had 17 aggregate total revenue. So I guess we're not too far off nationally.
And it certainly could have likely had, because the data that we're using now would have pertained to 2019 at best. So there will have been growth. Then we have kind of steady growth that's been happening across these sectors. So that's good. And I think if we get to the Q&A after, I'll try to get a pulse check from you guys to say how the sector's doing. But let me skip to the outlook so I can probably speed up a little bit. Sorry. But just on the outlook, this is not to go through the chart, but just to say, as I mentioned before, there's been a pretty huge policy response. And if I'm asked why, or if I'm optimistic about what's happening now, I would point to a couple of things that, thinking back to, we did respond to the financial crisis with a lot of actions and a lot of policies, but I can say for a fact that we've been much faster in terms of monetary policy, cutting interest rates quickly. So the Federal Reserve on March 3rd started cutting, and all the other central banks, Bank Canada, everybody else came into the fold and knew that we were facing a very big crisis and avoided the financial system from seizing up. And the government of Canada and other governments have been making up a lot of programs, in some cases on the fly, not really knowing where demand is, and then filling in holes and looking at eligibility criteria and making them bigger. So we are going to be paying people for a period of time to stay home for their own health and safety. And it's going to be a pretty big public sector burden in terms of the deficits that are coming. But for now, trying to put a floor on people's incomes for businesses and households, and it looks like at an aggregate level, hopefully that will be effective. But if you go to the next slide, we can talk about some of the ways. And I think for your members, thinking about different scenarios, because like I said before, this is really the most uncertain time that I've been going through this. So I'll mention interest rates. So I think we are in the effective lower bound for most central banks across the world. That was just on the chat line there. There is discussion of whether the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve will move to negative interest rates, which we have seen in Europe and we've seen in Japan. There's not really as much benefit coming from going from, say, 0 to minus 15 basis points or those kind of things. But they've cut from normal interest rate space as much as they can. And much more of the action now is coming not with the interest rate, level of interest rates, but these asset purchase programs, where I mentioned the government of Newfoundland, where they didn't have any buyers at some point in March as they were putting out looking for debt, and the Bank of Canada is coming in and stepping in and making a lot of asset purchases. So I do think we're seeing a lot of support And so interest rates are low, and interest rates are, I expect, to be kind of at this as low as they can be level until COVID has either passed, or vaccines, or we're back to people have confidence in the economy and we get going again. So some of these recovery scenarios, our current base case is in that reddish maroon kind of thing, which I call the check mark for you, just so you can see it on the chart there. So we've seen a pretty sharp drop in the first quarter, and second quarter we're going to see as well. And so the base case outlook is that, assuming that there's no big second waves of infections, and assuming that people can get back to work in a somewhat, let's say, restricted and cautious but more normal level, there will be a gap between what the economy would have done before COVID and what it's going to be able to do for the next couple of years for sure. And thinking about a second wave, which could come in there if restrictions come off, people end up spreading disease more, we could see more of this W kind of economy impact, where it's a double dip. We fall, we get back and excited, and then we fall back again. Or it could be much more prolonged. So if the policy measures I talked about are not really successful in keeping households and businesses liquid, and you get bankruptcies and job losses that are currently temporary, if those become permanent, then that would hit spending behavior and business spending, and we could be in a much lower environment. So it's just to kind of sketch it out at a high level. The next chart is on country considerations. I don't know how relevant that'll be for everybody here, depending on where you're selling into. But just to give you a high level on the phasing, in part, we've seen a lot of these stringency measures. That's showing what the government has done to lock down citizens and businesses and those kind of things. And so really, as I mentioned in the first slides of that map, China was the first one hit. And so our expectation is that China will be kind of and Southeast Asia, as we're seeing now, the rebound will be sooner and faster in those countries, followed by Europe and North America, as we're kind of hitting trough now. And these other places now where the virus is starting to take off, Brazil, Russia, India, other emerging markets, things are going to get worse. If you're an oil producer, things are worse in those markets. Things are worse for the tourism-dependent markets I mentioned because of airline issues. So that chart just gives you a sense of that. Can you, Mike, can you see the question? I think there was one in the chat. I don't know if I can go to it. Do you have numbers?
Ryan,
Yep.
Could you help with the chat? Because I'm actually not seeing the chat.
I got it. It says something about U.S. market size for the industry. So let me take that one as we get to the. I'm almost done here. So let me just go down one more slide here, and I think we're getting to the very end.
I can't see the chat sharing screen. So
okay, sure. Well, let me just wrap up here, and then we'll do some Q&A. So yeah, this has been pretty massive, pretty historic, and everybody in all the economic work that we're doing keeps saying this is unprecedented. This is unprecedented. I mean, we did have a pandemic 100 years ago, and it was significant and impacted things. But this is not something that any economic forecaster really had. Even as late as January, I was doing a presentation, just started talking about this thing, which we called the coronavirus. Didn't know what it was first couple of weeks, and then things started to get worse and worse and worse. So this is a huge shock. It's pretty much impacting everybody in the economy, in not just socially but economically. There are some winners, though. There are some sectors and some businesses and households that have done better than others. And what we've seen, at least in the data that I look through, there's a very big difference in terms of company size. If you're if you're a small SME, if you employ less than 5 people, the impacts have been pretty catastrophic. And for those that employ the larger firms that, let's say, 200 million in annual sales, or they have 100, 500 employees, they're not doing well. But their sales have not fallen off anywhere near as much as bricks and mortar, smaller SME people. And some people that didn't have a base of savings, either households or businesses, this is a big financial strain people didn't see coming, and they're under a lot of pressure. We're doing this stuff online now that often would have been done before in person. And so what we've seen for the businesses that I look at in our survey, if you're able to do, let's say, half of your sales online before COVID, or you had the capacity, whether or not you're doing them, those sales are down, but they're doing much, much better. If you did not have the ability to reach customers and you had to do this in person, you couldn't do it over the phone, or you had issues with email, or your website wasn't very good, your sales are down. Most of these companies are down over 50% because of lockdowns. They've been essentially stopped for doing business. So there's a huge premium on those that had better websites, better servers, better online skills. And we've seen a lot of agility of companies trying to jump on the new fads. So looking there have been massive swings in different markets. And so some people, if you look ahead to see where the ball's going, I think some people have actually pivoted quickly and have done well in a challenging environment. So the big question that I have, you asked me kind of where we're at. It's not obvious to me that we've hit bottom yet, because the data that we look at are usually sort of in real time or a little bit delayed. Financial markets certainly have come back in a way that I think is a little bit stronger than they need to be. But in the economic data, just mathematically, we stopped a bunch of businesses, let's say 1 in 4, 1 in 3 basically stopped. As we bring that, that's turning the light switch off. As we try to bring that back on, we're not going to move all the way back up to where we were, but there is going to be some strong rebound just as people get back to some kind of normalcy there. But the containment measures that we have in place here, if the virus is contained, and if people can go around and go about their normal business in a few months, or by the end of the year, and we avoid a big second wave, then we do see a lot of demand, a lot of spending from various people who've been forced to go home, who continue to be on the payroll, who are still in decent situations. They have money to spend, and they're going to be looking to spend it. So again, there are opportunities there, and I think for businesses, I would just be thinking about contingency planning, because I mentioned this. We may have hit the bottom now, and there may be a pretty sharp rebound and opportunities to make some new spending, make some new capital investments, or we could be getting into kind of round 2, and this things could be getting worse. So you got to kind of be able to figure out in real time where you're at and what you should be doing. But I mentioned that the last part just on opportunities. So one is work from home. My estimates are something like 3 million Canadians, maybe more than that, have been forced to work from home now. That's a lot. And so I don't have an office. I'm talking to you now from my son's bedroom. And I can tell you there's a lot of people that are in the same situation where their house is not equipped for having everybody in it together. And I know that there is some demand of some people but the housing market will be hit hard. But the renovation market, I think that there's going to be certainly some activity on renos of people saying, okay, I can't afford another couple $100,000 my mortgage, and I can't move, and I want to stay in this neighborhood. So how do I make this work? And I think that's kind of where things are. And the cash crunch is real. A lot of companies are feeling this. You mentioned before some of these government programs. I can't go through in detail. I've included some of the slides there for people to look at. But you guys, the industry association, you guys are probably best situated to go through and tell people, what are the best programs for them? Where should they be looking? Because there is free money available right now from government sources, or if not free, as close to free, as good as you're going to get. But navigating those processes is tricky. So knowing people who've done it successfully is and word of mouth and talking to people in association, that's the best way to do it, I think. So my contact info is there, but let's do the kind of the Q&A. And I provide that for you just to give to people, and there's more in there than we can go through really. But happy to chat now.
I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see the some of the questions.
Okay.
Now you can see the questions too, Stephen. Did you want to have a go at them? Are you reading them yourself, or did you want me to read them?
I think the interest rate one, I think I've covered that one off, just to say that rates have hit rock bottom, but rock bottom is not the bottom, and there are contemplations of lower rates happening to go slightly negative in some major markets. So that would be in the UK and in the US. It's possible we'll see that, but other than the banking sector and things, it's not going to make that much of a difference. The ammo has been shot for the most part on interest rates, and I do anticipate nobody's going to be raising rates until they're certain that the economy is past whatever it is we're in right now. I don't have numbers for the US market size there by industry. I could look through and get some of our team to look through what is the opportunity, what are the market sizes in the US for the same industries. I think that's doable, because the data that we use is a North American classification system, so we can certainly look into some US sources to see what they've got. It's normally a 10-to-1 ratio, but I honestly have no idea in your sector if that's the case. But US housing, and if there are sales that are related to the US housing market, we see that going down by let's say about 15% this year. And in terms of revisions to economic data, for another review, do you estimate a revision to economic data? It depends. So like I said, we're switching to some non-official data sources now. So like I showed you the RBC data, where people are just looking at credit card data online. We're looking to Google and Apple that looks at mobility data. So if people are sitting in their house, or if they're driving to work, where they're going. And those data sources are useful, but they're not really economic activity. And so at StatScan, they're trying to figure out how much money is being spent. That's why the credit card data is useful. I would say certainly that there will be revisions, and when you go into big turning points in the cycle, it almost always is the case in my experience that things are eventually worse. So if I'm telling you now that it fell by 25%, it probably fell by 35%, and in 5 months, 10 months, we'll figure it out, and we'll start getting more sources of income, and so typically, the troughs get a little bit worse in most business cycle experience that I've had. But I think we do have a decent sense of, I would say, I still think that sort of 25 to 35% range at an aggregate level is about right. And I do think that given what's happening now with lockdowns, it stands to reason that we are at, we've stopped a bunch of economic activity. We are going to get some of that come back, but it's certainly not going to get back to normal. As long as I'm talking to you on this screen, this isn't normal, right? So that's what we have people in our department saying, like, are we back? And I said, no, like, this is so far from normal. And it's not a new normal yet either, right? Everybody's still adjusting.
Yeah. Interesting comments I've got from a couple of members. First of all, just some information for you, Stephen, for context. When the COVID hit, there was a big question on the definition of essential business, and obviously manufacturing was exempt, in particular for those in the sector that were supplying housing and residential construction, which a lot of our companies were doing.
But so does that mean everybody carried on and continued, and they were allowed?
Most of our members carried on in some way, some fashion. They may be short-staffed. Our furniture companies, a number of them stopped temporarily because their retail sites had closed down. I know there's some of them are starting to ramp back up, or they did ramp back up. But there was a time.
But foot traffic is down, though. I'm happy. I'd actually rather hear from you than me. So, but I'm assuming foot traffic and any of the kind of retail stuff is much less than it was, and overall construction and site activity is well below normal, though, right?
Yeah, it's everything's below normal, but nothing stopped altogether except some of the furniture folks at the beginning. But a lot of them have ramped back up again. So nothing completely stopped. There are some of our companies that kept going just as they haven't slowed down at all. I spoke to one of our companies yesterday, and he mentioned that a large company in Toronto, furniture company, cabinet company, and he said that when this is over, he's going to continue to have their team meetings in this format every day, because they're finding they're communicating now more and better than they ever have. And so the whole new normal thing, that's a cliche. But for us in the Alliance, we're going to continue this. What it did, well, I think you had one slide that referred to this, is that what COVID has done is it's forced our hand on the things that we were someday going to do. And for us, the whole online.
Yeah, I had a chart later on there that there's a whole bunch of trends, but not to get into it, but stuff that's happened before COVID for 10 years, it's just going to take a step up from where it was. So work from home was probably 4 or 5% of the Canadian economy was working from home in some fashion. It will probably move up to 15 to 20%. It'll be 35% now, but it'll be a step up, a permanent new level. I think just given that some people love it, some people have seen that this is going well. Other people are dying to get back to work. Office people, they hate it. They can't. This is terrible. So we have in our group, there's kind of two people, in the sense of some people are just like let us get back to work, let us open up as normal. And other people like, now that I've had the taste of this, I never want to do this. I never want to go back and commute again.
So if we're going to continue to be, 30%, 25, 30% lower in terms of our volumes, and with staff cuts and everything, do you think that companies need to be, taking the same approach as the last recession where cash is king? Do they need to be cautious? Or is this a good time to invest in new equipment and expand? Interest rates are low. This is going to end.
Well, there's two sides. No, you're right. There's definitely two sides to that. I think on the cash is king side, looking at a lot of the companies and corporates that can borrow have been borrowing a lot. As mainly because the cost of capital is essentially free for most companies, or it's as cheap as it's going to get for many companies if you haven't been downgraded to borrow now. So if you're looking at making a longer term investment and you do have a good sense of clarity that whatever the demand is, it will be there at the time that you make that investment. By the time you get back there, this could be cheaper in terms of labor. This could be cheaper in terms of capital. This could be a great time to do it. So there is kind of that going for it. So we have seen, I mean, I'm interested to hear if your members, if financing has become tough for people, if people are kind of in some temporary layoffs and wondering about permanency or not. But there's always in the crisis, we see some great new companies are born, new opportunities that people come through, and people that have a longer term vision and they stick to it and they play their cards right can do extremely well. But it's obviously the risk return is there. It's a riskier proposition now to put down 5 or 10% of your money now than it was 6 months ago.
Right, but if you can look past it, it might be, well, it should be a good decision.
Yeah, but if it's something that made sense to do in 2021 or 2022, and if you have some confidence that this COVID thing will, if not be licked, at least we'll wake up someday and people will want to shake hands or at least engage with human beings again, and that makes sense in that business model, then it does make sense to do it as you can do it now, as things like we're seeing. I mentioned on renos, but some of our neighbors are renovating their houses now because there's so much upheaval and so much craziness. Just why don't you do it now? It's cheaper, it's easier. You're already living through craziness, so what's having a contractor stomp through your living room when you got your kid in your lap?
Now, we earlier on in this series of events, COVID events that we've done, we've exhausted reviewing all of the available programs. So everybody knows what's available. They're all posted on our website. We have a COVID tab there where everything's listed. I know a lot of companies access the EDC program that allowed the $40,000 loan with, what was it, 10% forgivable? Yep. Or what it was.
There's 10,000 of 40 is a grant, and they've extended the length of those payback periods as well and things like that. So
I think everybody's got that. So we've carried on that, having that list of resources for everybody. One of the things that started with some of the companies that had a lot of capacity, and they noticed that there were some companies slowing down. Robert just posted this. I know that they've partnered and they put out tenders to a lot of our other companies, smaller companies, to do work for them. So basically outsourcing with smart partners. The company I was talking about yesterday, they did it and they got 7 of our members, other smaller companies, doing work for them. So there's a real trend, and one of the benefits of our cluster model is that companies are doing work for each other. So there's a lot of business to business happening within our industry, which is really dynamic, and I believe that it's going to help us. So does anybody else have a question they'd like to post? Or it's not very often that we've got the deputy chief economist at our bidding in a meeting, and you're welcome to unmute your mic.
It's very exciting. It's a very exciting time. I need people to just restrain yourself.
You're welcome to unmute your mic to ask a question or type one into the chat.
Stephen, Stuart Kramer from NGen.
Hi, Stuart.
How are you doing today? Question.
Great. How are things?
Things are good. So, question in terms of re-onshoring of manufacturing, is there a real opportunity here for Canada? And given that a lot of our end markets are in the US, what should we be doing to help Canadian manufacturers prepare themselves to take advantage of those opportunities? How do we drive our supply chains in the right direction?
Okay, so I showed that slide before about supply chain management and adjustment, and I think this is a very big point and a very big opportunity. So as you guys know, Donald Trump has been trying, at least in the U.S. and at least for the U.S., to reshore supply chains back, particularly from China, and so there is a new sense that given COVID and given some of these shocks we've had, that we're going to see more activity happening, if not domestically, at least regionally. So the reshoring pressure is real, and people looking for more resilient and more redundant manufacturing processes, I think is real. So I do see that as one of the trends that we're watching, much more activity in North America. So the story had been with the government of diversification over this longer period. And I think that at some point is going to be pushing a rock up a hill. We have right there. Well, the globalization reset is essentially that point there, that we are seeing companies that had been outsourcing where labor was cheapest, or these labor intensive tasks, instead of looking to China, they may be looking to Mexico now, as just a high level example of the fact that we had always in global value chains seen regionalization. So Europe traded more with Europe, and in North America we had kind of factory US, but that was the hub, but we had spokes in Mexico and in Canada. So I think people expect that globalization is going to be more regional, at least in the next couple of years, and that supply chains are going to be adjusted. As I said, that a lot of companies are rethinking, does it make sense to have my single supplier somewhere in Japan where I can't get the part, and I need it, and it's extremely costly. So I don't know. I don't have much to add. I'm happy to hear what you've said on that. But we do see opportunities, and we do see a lot more looking, if not local, looking I would say North American, and that's why the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement, which is coming into force very soon, I think will be helpful to clarity, because given all the stuff that Trump had been doing on trade, there were a lot of uncertainty, a lot of worries about what would North American trade rules be. And now is a good time as any kind of get that law passed and give Canadian manufacturers some clarity on what rules they're going to be playing with.
Okay, thank you, Stuart, for that question. Hope I got to the right screen there, the right slide. On that note, we're at 1:25. We've got a little bit over time. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'd like to thank you, Stephen, for your time with your presentation on the economic outlook. We'd like to have you back again. And to congratulate you that you were right, or to badger you that you were wrong.
I'm not coming. If I'm wrong, I'm not coming back. But if I'm right, then I'm going to be singing. Yeah, then I'm definitely back.
And Barry, Reid, thank you for your time, also, and the valuable information you shared with your presentation. And I'm sure that there'll be a number of companies that are interested in participating in our program on leadership. Just as we close out, what I'd like to do is invite everybody to mark your calendars for June the 17th. We're going to work away busily at putting that event together. It'll be the same time frame from noon to about 1:15. And we're going to end the event now. And then